Like, what is like the conversation happening in motorsports with respect to like maybe maintaining some of these more conventional forms longer, like, and maybe with alternative fuels or hybrids or things of that nature?
You know, a lot of the things I see aren't necessarily about the cars themselves
Hmm.
yet. So there has been some talk in NASCAR about some sort of hybridization of the car. I don't know how soon that would happen. It would also be very, very mild hybrid. It
Sure.
is not going to be like an actual hardcore hybrid. It would be very mild. But I think a lot of racing series right now are less focusing on their products and their cars that they race and more focusing on some form of carbon neutrality. Like, when we put out this many emissions, we're going to try to get those emissions back and we're going to lower our footprint. You see this happen with Formula One has talked about carbon neutrality, things like that, but also on a smaller scale with series like Extreme E. Extreme E is an electric SUV racing series, and they go race in the remote parts of the world, basically, the parts of the world that are affected by climate change. Instead of flying to these places, they take everything on a boat.
Sure.
Like, there are conversations about this, but I feel like those conversations are often less about the cars themselves and more about how people get places,
Sure.
which is a very fair approach because I don't remember it super well, but I feel like Formula One did an emissions report pretty recently where they talked about where their most of their waste and emissions
Sure.
came from. And I think most of it was travel to the tracks, not actually what happens on track.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because
Mm-hmm.
it's always a nuanced conversation. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
layers to any of this. From like we like to try and do like total accounted costs for various things here, but when you look at like the total roll up of everything, you're talking for us in the costing world, it's from depending on how detailed we're going, but like raw material all the way up, so to speak, and there's burden and layers of cost as you kind of go through these stages. And it's interesting because whether it's like some of our like competitors or just people that do other type of costing services, the scope of what they look at, right, is very different at times.
Yeah.
And then there's always a question, at least on our end, like, I'd like to understand a little bit more about how you got that number, and you're like, fair
Mm-hmm.
enough,
Mm-hmm.
and then we walk through some of the aspects of that with them, and they're like, okay, and based off your assumptions, I can see why you've arrived at the the cost that you have. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just interesting. I don't follow it closely, on like on Sundays with my daughter, I'll watch like Australian vintage car racing, which is out of control. I don't know if you watch it, but
Love that.
it's the commentation's amazing, and it's just interesting to see these cars that are worth a bit of money, and are classics in their own right, just bending fenders and slamming into corners and crashing on some of the most technical tracks in the world, like Bathurst and stuff like that. So
Classic car racing always terrifies me because I look at those cars and I'm like, oh, I watched some of those cars race and you just bend one of them.
yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously they fix them. You look and you'll
Yeah.
see some of the same drivers, year after year, and same '69 Boss Mustang, same. Probably
Mm-hmm.
been rebuilt 3 or 4 times. Fortunately for some of those cars, they make a lot of reproduction parts, and you can essentially stitch them back together almost indefinitely, realistically. Maybe some of the older, like Dodge products and maybe even some like your older AMC stuff. That's what's actually wild to see is when you see like some
Mm-hmm.
Javelins and other cars like that, like being fixed and race or wrist, I would say being wrist.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
now, do you race like now? I know you started kind of in motorsports. Do you?
I do track days. I
Okay,
have done a couple of races myself, but often my days are just so full of
sure,
actually doing my day job, and my day job is often reviewing cars, writing about them, and writing about motorsports events and interviewing people and things like that. And so it is hard to fit that in. I try to do a few track days a year just so I can drive and I feel like it is helpful to have an understanding of the racetracks you watch people drive and also of how to drive the cars yourself. Like, it allows you to have conversations with racing drivers where you more understand what they're talking about and you're able to carry that conversation better. So I definitely do try to do that. I don't race as much as I would like to. I
Mhm.
would love to race more. It's just, you get done with the work week and you're like,
Sure.
I need a nap.
Right. Yeah. No, I feel you for sure. And honestly, it's expensive,
Yes,
like
very.
depending the weight and stuff like that of the car. It's the
Mhm.
reason Miatas are, popular, right? So there's a couple of us
Mhm.
that rock them here, but
Mhm.
some other cars you can kind of go through 2 or 3 sets of front tires. When I one time went into the shop to get tires, and they're like, "This is the 3rd time we put front tires on your Mustang." I'm like, You're like, "You're still in the original sets of rears?" I'm like, "Yep." It's a
No.
heavy car, so it gets beat up in the turns. But
Yeah, we have a sim rig at home, but mainly my husband uses it. I find that with the sim rig, because he uses iRacing, and we have a
mhm,
very nice sim rig. We have a triple monitor, racing
sure,
seat, direct drive wheel. It's a very, very good sim rig. I find that I'm okay with using it on ovals and driving ovals, but I don't necessarily like the sim rig on road courses. And I think I figured this out. I think it's because I have enough experience on the racetrack on road courses to where I'm looking for the feel in my seat, but not enough experience where if I'm a racing driver, I'm looking for my marks and not relying on my feel. So I rely on my feel because, when I'm on track, that's what I rely on. But I don't have enough experience to look for those marks and be able to be really technical about it. So I just find that when I do road courses on the sim rig, I get very, very thrown off. I can take turn 1 at Circuit of the Americas incredibly well in a real car. On iRacing, I miss it every time.
sure,
I can't do it. It's just so deeply confusing for me because I'm looking for something that's not there.
yeah. I mean, I could definitely see that for sure.
Mhm.
I don't have a ton of experience. I've done, a host of track days. We got Waterford, which is very close to
Mhm.
me, which is a nice small technical track. Um, and then Groton, which is very pretty if you've ever been out that way. But yeah, I mean, I play Forza and stuff like that. But that's pretty much where I do a lot of it right now.
Mhm.
With my daughter, I'll kind of sit her down. We'll try and steer. Doesn't go well, but we'll get there eventually. But
I love that.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm waiting. I think Forza Horizon or Forza 8 comes out soon, so we'll see. But it's I guess it's kind of a nice bridge. But like it's interesting. We'll hop on. We'll drive around with Forza Horizon, so she can just drive around and see what's kind of up. And I don't know if it was the last update, but there was like a whole donut media thing,
Yep.
right? Like, and I'm like, oh
Mhm.
my god, it's kind of wild to see that something that started like small, relatively speaking, right? Just a couple of guys going through some stuff, and then you have essentially not only like a brand. There's whole subsegments within this brand, and then now it is made it into like the digital space beyond, right? And it's kind of wild. Like high car, low car is now in Forza, right? So you're like, all
It's so
right,
cool.
this is interesting. I can't drift to save my life, so I've kind of stopped in that story path aspect of the drifting. I'm like, well, we'll just do something else for now. But
Yeah.
so it's, I mean, I kind of have to ask, like, you know, what is it kind of like with working for Donut with essentially like I would say an organization now that has so many like multifacets that's still so young, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they reached out a couple of years ago and they said, "Hey, we want to do an F1 podcast. Do you and your co-author Elizabeth want to be on it?" And we were like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we went out there, we recorded our first episode. We had a great time and now we record every single week at home. They
Right.
bought me this microphone and they bought me the nice little pop filters so you can't hear my breath on the microphone. And we do a weekly podcast about Formula One, and it's super fun. And we get to go out to the studio a couple of times a year. So we get to go meet everybody, participate in some YouTube videos, do
Sure.
stuff like that. It's really cool to be folded into something that is already so big and so
Sure.
successful.